Welcome back into the 14 for our Friday edition. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Blake Lovell alongside me. This is going to be a two-part show today. Blake and I will talk some hoops, and then we will have our much-anticipated baseball announcement later in the podcast. Blake and I will stick to hoops for our part. Blake, welcome in. It is going to be another fun weekend in the SEC, and I know you and I are both looking forward to watching plenty of hoops this weekend.
Yep, should be fun, Chris. As we've said before, I think every game at this point, means something to some of these teams that are playing for these NCAA tournament spots, and especially the case, I think, this weekend. We've talked a lot this week about Arkansas. I think it's an important weekend for Arkansas. Ole Miss, things are starting to get a bit more important for them too. And then for the teams, near the top, Alabama still trying to play for number 1 seed. They need to beat Georgia to keep that intact. But really just, the games get more important this time of year. We always say that, and especially the case for some of these teams that maybe are hovering near the bubble, like LSU maybe as well.
Well, let's start taking a look at potential NCAA seeding. We're going to cite two things here. First is Joe Lunardi's bracketology, which I think everybody in our listening audience knows who Joe Lunardi is and what he does. The second one is Bracket Matrix, and they run a website, bracketmatrix.com. You can check that out. They average, 70-something brackets. And sometimes those can be a little glitchy, as we were talking off air. Some people have Kentucky in the tournament as 11 and 12 seeds. Now, I think we can only conclude that would be the Wildcats winning the SEC tournament, because I don't know how you have Kentucky in at large. But for whatever reason, there's some odd things in that from time to time. But it's an average of all the people out there who do these brackets. And it's an interesting thing that I like to look at. Let's start with Alabama. The Crimson Tide, solidly a 2 by both Lunardi and Bracket Matrix. Bracket Matrix has the Crimson Tide 7th. It actually tells you where the teams are. It doesn't just say that you're a 2 seed. It says you were 7th overall. So in this case, Alabama would be 7th overall. That would make the Crimson Tide the 3rd number 2 seed. Next is Tennessee. Both Bracketology and the Bracket Matrix have the Vols as a 3. Bracket Matrix has the Vols as the 2nd 3 seed, followed by Missouri. This is an interesting discrepancy, Blake. Missouri is 5 in bracketology and 4 in bracket matrix. In fact, not just a 4, but the first number 4 seed. I'm guessing there's been some updating that hasn't been done there. And we talked about Missouri as a team that there's a pretty big discrepancy between the net and where the Tigers appear in people's brackets, because I think the net is around 40, high, maybe mid-30s, and most people have Missouri as a 3 or 4 because the Tigers have a lot of big wins, as we have said. But right here, you can see a little bit of the disconnect, and that's something we have talked about. Is something that it's going to be very interesting to see where Missouri gets seeded if the net doesn't go up much between now and Selection Sunday.
Yeah, we've talked about the difference in the numbers and, just the love that we have for Missouri's overall resume. But when you just look at, kind of what the numbers think of them, there is a difference. I mean, we talk about it too with like KenPom and stuff. I mean, they're the 6th best team in KenPom if you just look at, the rankings there too. So it's one of those things where, we kind of talked about it. When Missouri's bad, they're bad. And when they're good, though, they're capable of beating some of these better teams. But they're probably the most curious one, I think, for me at this point, just in terms of where they wind up being seated, outside of the bubble teams that we'll talk about. But I just feel like, depending on how they finish their season, if they get another bad loss somewhere, which I would have to pull up their schedule to look and see who that may be. Well, like we've talked about, I mean, they actually play like Georgia, South Carolina, Texas A&M left. So if they lose one of those games, you feel like that could really start to send them, you don't want to start getting in that 6-7 potential territory if you're a team like this that's already beaten Alabama, Tennessee, Illinois, Oregon, all those teams. So I'm very curious to see kind of how they finish the season, because like we said, it's almost like the numbers don't really give them a lot of wiggle room to be able to kind of stay, just because they're a little bit different than maybe their resume looks right now.
Yeah, Missouri 34 in the net Friday morning, which is exactly what it was yesterday. There are a few Thursday games, but I don't think that it really changed much. Colorado moved up a little bit. I'm looking at the overall net rankings. The Buffaloes moved up from 15 to 12, but not a lot of movement in the net rankings overnight. And Missouri stays right where it was yesterday. So let's see. Next, we have got the Florida Gators. Florida is number 7 in Lunardi and also number 7 in bracket matrix. Arkansas a 9 in Lunardi, same in bracket matrix. LSU is 10 in Lunardi's bracket, 11 in bracket matrix. And let's get into the weekend games. I think the two that I see as key are Tennessee going to LSU. I think if LSU can win that game, that's a huge boost to get LSU further. I wouldn't say that the Tigers are on the bubble, but we have aired some concerns about LSU and its resume, and especially the defensive end and how that could play out. I think if LSU can get a win at home against Tennessee tomorrow, again, Darius Days is back for the Tigers. That helps the Tigers tremendously. If the Vols win that game, I just think that further cements Tennessee as a 2 and frankly, probably inches the Vols up, or excuse me, cements them as a 3 for now, maybe inches them towards the discussion of a 2 seed, which I think you and I both believe the Vols have the talent to get there for sure. The other one, Arkansas at Missouri, I think that's the most interesting one maybe on the schedule because we talked about Arkansas needing to beat some SEC or some NCAA tournament quality teams. Of course, getting a win against Missouri and in Columbia would really move the needle there. So I really see those as the two biggest games this weekend, Blake.
I do too, and I think I'm with you. I think Arkansas, Missouri is probably a little bit more intriguing just from the standpoint of knowing, like we talked about, what it could do for both of those teams. You know, either with a win or a loss. Really, when you think about it. But I look at LSU here, and I think this is a good spot for LSU. Coming off of that win at Mississippi State, we talked about what they did on the offensive side. And we've said before, I mean, Tennessee, you would think maybe this is a step forward for Tennessee based on, Jaden Springer and what he's done on offense. But at the same time, we've seen Tennessee have these stretches where they just can't score. And I think that could be a problem because I really, and maybe I'm wrong here, I feel like it's going to be tough for Tennessee to be able just to completely shut down this LSU team, despite the fact that, Tennessee is a team that is one of the best defensive teams in the country. I still think this is going to be a challenge for them to be able to hold LSU down, to that level. And so I wonder, if this game starts to be a run and gun type game or there's lots of points put up on the board, I wonder if Tennessee's consistency on offense is going to be able to sustain that and keep up with LSU. So I think that's going to be certainly a very fun game, maybe even the most exciting game of the weekend. But the Arkansas-Missouri one, surely at this point, I think has a lot, as we said, of ramifications when it comes to the NCAA tournament and what that could look like for both of those teams. Something else, Chris, I wanted to point out, and I just realized this yesterday. I saw someone bring this up on Twitter. Maybe Aaron Jordan, the SID at Alabama. But, we've talked about Tennessee and their defense, and really I think a lot of the times we've seen Tennessee ranked at, whether it's number 1, number 2, number 3 in adjusted defensive efficiency in KenPom. Well, turns out that Tennessee is now number 2, and who they're behind now? They're behind Alabama. Alabama is number 1 in the country now, at the very top when we're talking about adjusted defensive efficiency there in KenPom, which is so crazy to think about because, think about where this team has been at. Like, you go back to last year, they were not good on defense at all. And now, in one season, all of a sudden, I've said it so many times this year, this Alabama team, the defense has been the biggest key for them. They're a good offensive team, but their defense has been what has gotten them to this point to be 11-1 in the SEC. So I think that's a fascinating thing to kind of look at too here as they get ready to host Georgia on Saturday.
No, that's a good call. I had noticed the Vols had slipped to 2, but I did not catch that Alabama had gone in that spot. I'm also looking at KenPom because adjusted defensive efficiency, okay, that is adjusted for opponent and how good the guys you play are. So there's some formula that Ken applies to that. I'm not even going to dare guess at how that works out. But you also have the raw efficiency numbers, right? Those are the ones of actually what you give up. And I'm looking on KenPom.com in conference play only. Alabama per 100 possessions in the SEC in the games it has played gives up 89.3 points in league games. Tennessee gives up 94.8 per 100 possessions. So that's a pretty substantial difference between the two teams. I mean, both elite defensive teams, but my goodness, when you look at it that way, and let me look at schedule and who's played the toughest schedule in the league. Let's see, Ken Palm has got Alabama playing the third toughest schedule in the league. Lovell's playing the 11th. So my goodness, when you look at it, not just in terms of the actual numbers in league play, but you look at it that Alabama's also played a tougher schedule. Goodness gracious, that jumps off the page, Blake.
Yeah, they've been impressive. There's no other way to put it. That's what I mean. It's one of those teams that when they get going on offense, man, they can be so exciting to watch. But I really think a lot of it is fueled by their defense, and that's not something we've been used to. Some of those Avery Johnson teams he had there, they were very good on defense at times, and the offense was the struggle. But really, I think you look back to last year, Nate Oates' first season, we kind of looked at it and said, hey, if this team wants to be, a national type contender, it's got to change on the defensive side because we know what they're capable of on offense, but they've got to play defense. And boy, they've done that this season. And I think again, it's just a team that has been able to kind of have their guards fuel everything that they do on both sides of the court. And they've got the speed, they've got the athleticism, and it's really paying off for them because, yeah, it's I did not even realize that. I mean, I knew, kind of looking at Alabama stats throughout the year, I'm like, man, this defense, they're in the top 5, 10 defensive efficiency and all that. But when I saw yesterday, I'm like, wow, they have moved up all the way to number 1. And when you just look at the numbers that they've given up in conference play, teams are shooting 25% from 3 against them in conference play. That's pretty good. So.
Now, look, nothing I'm about to say is going to take away from Alabama being an elite defensive team. But when you put teams this elite under a microscope, you start looking for flukes or flaws or whatever. The only thing that I can really poke a hole in Alabama for is three-point defense. And Alabama, and not in the way that you think I'm going to, okay? Alabama allows opponents to shoot 25% from the three-point line. That is far and away the best percentage in the league. And again, this is just in league games only. Some people will say that three-point defense is, I guess, more random, that you can't have as much an effect on that as you could maybe two-point shooting. I have not studied the issue. I don't know what my belief of that would be. I don't know that I'm qualified to offer an opinion on that other than to say that has been a point I've heard discussed. So if you want to pick nits in Alabama a little bit, you might say there's an element of flukiness there in terms of I don't know that you can sustain a 25% three-point defense across the season against the league. Now, maybe Nate Oates has figured this out and would put forth an argument that you can. But that's the one thing that I would add as a caveat is that some of this that Alabama's doing is that the three-point defensive percentage it is allowing in league games is extremely low and frankly probably going to be hard to sustain even if the Crimson Tide does play outstanding defense, which I expect it will.
Well, let's point this out too. I looked at the numbers last year. I haven't done it this season, but the SEC traditionally is not a league that relies on the three-pointer. Like it's not one to where you've got these teams. There can be some good shooting teams. Don't get me wrong, but I think last year it was the year that you just saw a huge step back in terms of teams shooting from outside. Now we had the changes and all that stuff we've had in the line getting moved to back, and that always has something to do with it. But I think we just look back over the years. This is usually a league, like we say, that gets a lot of points, whether it's, inside the arc at the free throw line, because, we know how many fouls are called in the SEC. That certainly helps. So it's not exactly like you have, the best shooting teams in the country all spread out across this league. And it is a league, I think, that you just look at the numbers that if you compare it to other conferences, which Ken Palm has that stat too, and if you go back and look at just the SEC's three-point percentage, which this year, it's better than it was, I think. But that's always something to keep in mind too, to where, look, it's obviously a strength for Alabama, and you're doing a good job of not letting teams beat you from the three-point line. But it is a league too, I think, that tries to get a lot of points, inside the arc at the free throw line. And like I said, when there are a lot of fouls called, sometimes that just kind of forces those kind of approaches too on offense. So.
Yeah, and last year, best three-point defense in the conference in league only was South Carolina, 28.3, Ole Miss, 28.4, then Mississippi State, 28.7. So I guess it's not, I don't think that Alabama will continue to defend the three-point line at that rate, but certainly, something under 30 is not out of reach and not I guess flukish is a good way to put it. I mean, again, we are trying to find the little holes and things that could change. Whether Alabama's allowing 25% 3-point defense or 30 or whatever, the fact is the Crimson Tide are still pretty elite on that end.
Yeah, they are, and that's something too. I was looking back at it as you were talking, but the SEC shot 32.3% last year in conference games only from three, which was 28th nationally in terms of just ranking. In the 32 conferences that KenPom ranks. So that's something to point out too. Is that again, this league is not really always been the greatest 3-point shooting league. And that's something that I find fascinating just from an offensive standpoint. It has nothing to do with Alabama's defense, but that's something too that I think about and look at. But like you said, it's hey, Alabama's magic number now. I want to say it's down to, what is it? I think it's 3 or 4. I think it's 3 to have a share of the regular season title. I want to say it's still 4 to win the regular season because of Missouri's loss now, because you've got all those teams behind them sitting there with 4 losses. So Alabama, not too far away.
Yeah, Alabama's 11-1. KenPom projects the Crimson Tide to go 16-2. Tennessee is 4 games back in the win column, 3 in the loss, and KenPom projecting the Vols to go 11-5 and finish second. So, yeah, Alabama getting pretty close. And speaking of Alabama, the 2 next games in order of importance, Georgia goes to Alabama. I think we both expect the Crimson Tide to take care of business, but Georgia has shown a tendency to pop up and give some teams issues. Again, that's not a game that really moves the needle for Alabama with the win, but it's loss avoidance. I think I would say the same for Ole Miss. I don't know that Ole Miss going to South Carolina, which is 104 in the net rankings, really does much for the Rebels' chance of getting a bid, but you lose that one, and what is already a very, very difficult path for the Rebels becomes next to impossible almost. Maybe you get a win at Missouri, as we talked about, and that helps. But again, 2 games where loss avoidance is important for teams, I think. And you've got a lot more to lose than you do to gain if you're Ole Miss and Alabama this weekend.
A little concerned for Ole Miss, not going to lie. I think this is, we've seen South Carolina do this before, and I don't know. They've lost 2 in a row at home. They got blown out Mississippi State. They had a chance against Alabama, and now they're sitting here, I think, in a prime spot for Ole Miss to come off of a potential letdown spot on the road after that big home win against Missouri. I'm very fascinated by this game because this to me feels like the South Carolina game, and just like that Florida game where they go down there and win. I don't know. For whatever reason, I get the feeling that this is going to be one of those that goes down to the final possession type of games. Because as we've said, Ole Miss has really started to pick it up on offense. I think they've scored. I put the stat out yesterday. They've scored back-to-back. Scored 80 plus back-to-back for the first time this season in these past 2 games against Missouri and Auburn. And now they go on the road against the South Carolina team. Not great on defense. But I don't know. This to me feels like one of those games that could maybe be a little bit of a rock fight to see who comes out on top here. So I'm a little concerned about this one for Ole Miss. But if they can win it, then you just keep going. Like we said, then you just have to keep winning to stay in the tournament picture. And then for Alabama and Georgia, yeah, just one that you would think Alabama's defense against the Georgia team that's made a late push against Tennessee, but Alabama's the better team there.
Well, and Joe Lunardi does not even have Ole Miss in one of the first 8 out. So that's how much ground the Rebels have to make up. 2 games that are almost meaningless in terms of any postseason implications. Auburn goes to Kentucky. As we know, the Tigers have taken their medicine, are not going to go to the NCAA tournament this year. To respond to the NCAA's allegations, they just said, we'll take our probation this year. We're not going to go to the tournament. Not that Auburn, I think, was going to make it anyway. Kentucky now, if the Wildcats were to win 7 regular season games, Kentucky's still going into the regular season at 12-13. Now, just for argument's sake, if Kentucky wins 7 in a row, maybe goes to the title game in Nashville and loses, then you might see the Cats get some at-large consideration. But barring that, it's almost mathematically impossible for the Wildcats to go to the NCAA tournament at this point without winning the tournament in Nashville, which, of course, comes with an automatic bid. So that game basically meaningless in terms of any sort of postseason implications. Vanderbilt, Mississippi State, kind of the same way. Vandy not going to go without winning the tournament in Nashville, and Mississippi State at number, I believe it's 82. Yes, it is 82 in the net ranking. So we talked about Ole Miss not even being one of the first 8 teams for the tournament. Mississippi State is a light year or two beyond that. So anyway, not much at stake in those 2 games. And then, of course, Florida and Texas A&M postponed. Goodness, are the Aggies even going to play basketball again, Blake?
Yeah, I'm curious about that too. It's not ideal, and for Florida, like we're saying, I mean, Florida's in a pretty good spot, I think, from an NCAA tournament standpoint. But you still probably want to be able to play some games here to not have those pauses, because I think we talked about it before, and if we haven't done it on the podcast, there's a lot of data and research for people who have looked at these teams that have had to pause and how they play coming off those pauses. It's not particularly great. And so I think if you're a team, wanting to kind of be in shape to go into the tournament, feeling good about yourself, you want to be able to play some games here. So, those are never ideal. And one thing I was looking at, Chris, this is crazy, isn't it? What a difference a year can make. Last year at this time, Kentucky and Auburn, well, not exactly this time, but about a month from here, Kentucky and Auburn both 25-6 last year. And, Kentucky won the SEC. Auburn would have been right behind them. But now they're sitting here in an absolutely meaningless game, you feel like, in mid-February, because that's the difference that it can make in a year in a league like this. And that's just so crazy to think about, that we're talking about this game that really doesn't have a lot of implications at all for either on the NCAA tournament front. We know for sure for Auburn. For Kentucky, like you said, it's going to take them winning out and probably winning more in the SEC tournament. So that is that's just a very wild thing, I think, to think about.
I'm going to launch my first bold prediction for next season. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say both Auburn and Kentucky finish higher in the league standings next year than this year.
That's a good one. I think that's probably, I don't know if FanDuel or DraftKings, they're making their big push now here in Tennessee, but I don't know if they have those bets available. If they do, I would probably jump on that one pretty quickly. Although I don't know that they have the best odds. I will say that.
That's the insight our listening audience tunes in for. And with that, we're about to begin the second part of the podcast in a moment, in which I have pre-recorded. We will splice it onto the end of this, and we'll make our baseball announcement in that one. But with that, Blake, any parting thoughts on SEC hoops this weekend before we end our segment?
Now, big games, like we said, just a lot of interesting ones on tap this weekend, and I'm excited for the baseball and what you guys have in store there. I know it's something that, like we said, we've been kind of hyping it up all week here, and this is sort of that next step for us. We've been talking a lot of basketball, but lots of baseball coming, and that will kind of coincide with the launch of our website here pretty soon too. So baseball season right around the corner, a week away, and I'm excited as you guys are, and I know our new friend and peer here, he's going to be excited as well.
Well, and with that, we'll end the basketball portion of the podcast. Have a great weekend, and Blake, you and I'll be back at it on Monday. Okay, we've been teasing this for some time, and with that, we would like to make a very special announcement on our baseball coverage. We are adding to our podcast Barry Allen. I will let Barry take a moment to introduce himself, but I have known Barry for at least a decade. I think that Barry knows more SEC baseball than anybody alive. I think he will bring a lot to our show. And with that, I'll turn it over to Barry to let him tell you more about himself.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here, Chris, and thank you for your kind words and for your confidence and trust in me to help you navigate the SEC baseball season. I have been around a long time. I've seen a lot of games. I've seen a lot of players come and go. I don't know that I know more about it than anybody else, but I'm as old as anybody else, I feel like. My first season when I was working at Alabama was in 1985, and there were a lot of really good players in the league then. Will Clark, Rafael Palmeiro, and Bo Jackson, to name a few, and it's just escalated over the years. I mean, I think it's really grown, the sport, and the coverage has really grown, and we've been covering the game for a long, long time, various different, entities, and so it's been it's a job profession, obviously, but it's a hobby and a passion as well. I just like college baseball, not only the SEC but all levels of college baseball, and it's just, I think the game is going to grow. And had a long time at Alabama, and worked in television as well, and so it's just been a good career and a good sport to cover. And I'm thrilled to be able to write for the website and share information with our fans and our passionate fan base at the SEC with through our podcast each week, and looking forward to get started today.
Barry, you talked about Will Clark and Rafael Palmeiro and Bo Jackson and some big names. I don't know that the names in the league this year will turn out to be of that significance at the next level, but I don't know that they won either. My goodness, you look across the landscape of the All-American teams and potential draft lists for next year, and you just see a star-studded lineup in the SEC of a lot of players that the experts think are going to be major players at the major league level down the line.
Yeah, there's a lot of star power in this league, and there's 33 players listed on the various preseason All-American teams. I think every team has at least one player on an All-American team. There are 3 players that are consensus first-team preseason All-Americans. In Florida's Judd Fabian, LSU's Jaden Hill, and Vanderbilt's Kumar Rocker. They're all on the first team of Baseball America, Collegiate Baseball, D1 Baseball, and Perfect Game. Jack Leiter from Vanderbilt and Connor Prelip from Alabama are first-team All-Americans. Jack on the Baseball America, Collegiate Baseball, and D1 Baseball team. And Prelip from Alabama is on the first team for Collegiate Baseball, D1 Baseball, and Perfect Game. He was not included on the Baseball America team, which is primarily made up of people that they feel like are going to be the top draft picks this year. And while Prelip is a second-year freshman, he's not draft eligible till next year, so he would go out in 2022. So he would have a freshman year this year and a sophomore year next year, and many people believe that he's going to be one of the top guys taken in the draft next year, behind another studied class this year, which would include Leiter and Rocker from Vanderbilt. So a lot of star power in this league, a lot of guys from teams that just household names that people are aware of, and some that they may not be aware of. But Ryan Bliss at Auburn and Richard Fitz at Auburn. Arkansas's got a long list of guys, including Christian Franklin, Mississippi State's, represented on this list with Christian McLeod and the Tanner Allens of the world. Tennessee, has Jake Rucker, and the one that kind of is intriguing to me is Max Ferguson, who's on 2 first-team All-American teams for Tennessee. And didn't really play a lot as a freshman 2 years ago. And, of course, COVID last year. So a lot of people don't really know about him. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not real familiar with him either. And his name just keeps popping up on All-American teams and prospect lists and draft lists. So he's somebody that I'm going to be really interested to keep my eyes on this year and see what happens with him down the road. But he may be like the unknown, may not be unknown for some people, but one guy that I'm just not as familiar with is the Leiters and the Rockers and the Prelips and the Tanner Allens and guys like that, and Fabians, throughout the league. But certainly somebody that has gained a lot of respect, nationally, as far as an All-American and a high draft pick. I mean, I think he's in the top 30 in everybody's draft loads, going into this year. So that'd be somebody interesting to watch from Tennessee.
Yeah, Max Ferguson points to a lot about how good this league is. Ferguson was a preseason first-team All-American by a few outlets, but a second-team preseason All-SEC behind Robert Moore of Arkansas at second base on the All-SEC team that was released today. Another case in point here, Jaden Hill, who a lot of people think is maybe even the most talented arm in the league. Now, his body of work is lacking because he's been hurt and hasn't pitched a lot of innings, and a lot of last year got wiped out, of course. But Jaden Hill, a potential top 5 pick in the draft, he's not on the All-SEC first or second team. Now, they only pick 2 starting pitchers for each team, so there's 4 total. I don't totally understand that, but it's interesting. Those are 2 players who got first-team All-American recognition and didn't get first-team All-SEC recognition, or in the case of the second, even second-team All-SEC recognition.
Yeah, the SEC, I think that's just kind of in their bylaws, the 2 starters and the 1 reliever, and they, haven't really changed that. I don't know that the coaches are real gung-ho about doing it. I think they would be the ones that would have to bring that up and then go to the ADs and the presidents to maybe change how they pick their team. But as far as I could remember, and like I say, I'm old and I've been doing this a long, long time, it's always been the 2 starters and the 1 reliever, and you're like, well, there are 4 starters who made All-American, and one's getting $1 million, and he wasn't on your team. So how's that possible? Well, we only got 2 spots, and well, maybe you ought to increase your spots a little bit, because there's a lot of really, good players that, that get left off these teams. And that's good, too. That gives you and I something to talk about, and fans something to banter back and forth on social media. Well, why did our guy get left off the list? And why is this guy on there? His numbers aren't as good. And, some of it's based on draft or some publications, and, and then others, based on, no one else had a problem with him, but he hit 800 against you and he hit 220 against everybody else. But some coaches remember those, and that's how they get, they get remembered too. But there's a lot of really good players on everybody's team, and it's going to be a fun year to watch.
Yeah, and one of my favorite examples of that, back in 2015, Dansby Swanson was the second-team All-SEC shortstop and was also the number 1 pick in the draft that year. Of course, the reason he was Alex Bregman at LSU was also in competition, and he got picked as the first-teamer. But back to the big picture, Florida, the consensus number 1 team in the land. I think the Gators number 1 by all 6 of the outlets that make projections. And Florida got 12 of the 14 overall votes for SEC champion. You can't vote for your own team. The other teams who got votes, Mississippi State and Vanderbilt, got 1 each. But the Gators, and we will go more into depth on teams next week, but certainly Florida is everybody's pick to win it this year in the league and nationally, and I think for a lot of good reasons.
Yeah, early on, before they got into the league, but still, played a good schedule, and they looked to be, really good. It looked like it was Ole Miss and Florida headed towards a collision course to win their divisions, and that's kind of how they've got things set up for this year. But, Florida's got tied Arkansas with 4 players on the All-SEC team. Arkansas had 4 first-teamers. Florida had a first-teamer and 3 first-teamers, or 3 second-teamers. Judd Fabian, one of the consensus first-team All-Americans, he's the only Gator on the first-team All-SEC preseason team. But Josh Rivera, the shortstop, Tommy Mace, the starter, and Ben Speck, the reliever, the 3 Florida guys that are projected on the second-team preseason All-SEC team. Loaded club, 13 of the 14 votes in the Eastern Division. Clearly more points than anybody else. They got 91 points out of the poll, out of the way that's scored. Vanderbilt was 79, and Ole Miss, the Western Division champion, was 78. Are projected to be the top of the class. Play a really good non-conference schedule with all the teams in Florida. And, play Miami. They play Florida State. Good SEC schedule, but a lot of talent in Gainesville. New ballpark in Gainesville, which I think will enhance their abilities even more. The place where they played at McKeithen Stadium, just an eyesore. Not a lot of atmosphere. No place to hide from the rain, no place to hide from the heat. We both know there's heat in Florida, even in April and May. It can get really stifling in there. I've been to regionals down there where they've played and have to play at 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. and there's no one there because it's 115 degrees on that field. It's just so hot. But the new ballpark in Gainesville for them will really, really help them. fan friendly, player friendly, to really be a show palace for Gator baseball. And now they'll have a ballpark to go along with the team that they put on the field.
Well, in the East, people have pretty much made up their minds at the top. Of course, Florida is everyone's consensus number one, and Vanderbilt basically a consensus number two, I would say. The West, far more interesting. Ole Miss, I think, is the pick there. Half of the league picked the Rebels first, but you also got three teams in Mississippi State, Arkansas, and LSU who got first place votes. The Bulldogs got three, Arkansas got two, LSU got two. The West could end up being just a wildly interesting race, Barry.
Well, they should be, and it's the best division in all of college athletics. The SEC West baseball is by far the hardest. It's the toughest to navigate. Everybody's pretty good. They're really, really good. I mean, you look at Alabama, they're picked to finish last. They got 31 points in the rankings. Brad Bohannon feels like this is a regional team, and they feel like they've got a chance to compete, at a level that Alabama hasn't competed at in a long, long time. They're not that far removed from a 4-win SEC season, and they've only won 20 SEC games in the last 3 years. But he feels like with Connor Freelip, they have an opportunity to win every Friday night game. Now, he's not saying they're going to win every Friday night, but they haven't had that opportunity in years to go out and compete and pitch on a Friday night and be able to play with, Vanderbilt and Florida and South Carolina and Georgia and some of these teams. They haven't been able to do that. He feels like they can do that now. And they were 16-1 last year, but, not a great non-conference schedule. I still want to see them do that against an SEC team. And by looking at the way they've done the rankings, so do the coaches. And they got Auburn 6th, they got A&M 5th, and you got the 4, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Arkansas, and LSU. Ole Miss is really good. Doug Nikhazy is going to be a really good Friday night guy for them. He's going to be able to, win some games for them and help them out. Tim Elko, who's on the second team All-SEC, at third base. Hayden Dunhurst is the second team All-SEC pick at catcher. I mean, they hit home runs last year in the COVID shortened season, and they feel like they're going to hit the home runs again. They got a great atmosphere, although that's going to be limited like everybody else's. But Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Arkansas, LSU, and you mentioned Florida and Vanderbilt. I think all 6 of those teams in some projections for the regionals, the field of 64, all of those have popped up as top 8, top 16 seeds nationally, and at least hosting the first round of the NCAA tournament. And I've seen some posts where there's 11 teams projected to get in. I've seen one where there's 12 teams projected to get in. Either case, 11 or 12 would be an NCAA record, that the SEC and the ACC both share. But there's a lot of really good teams. You and I talked the other morning when we were, talking about what we're going to talk about on this podcast today. I think the SEC West in baseball is the toughest conference, toughest division in all of college sports. And you say, well, how is that with football? Well, it's even tougher than football because only Alabama wins in football. I mean, no one else, save LSU last year or the 2019 season, they won the West and won the national championship. Auburn's been to the national championship game twice in the last 10 years. But who else in the SEC West in football can compete with Alabama on a consistent basis? No one has. I mean, what are their longest winning streaks? Active winning streaks. I think they're double-digit winning streaks over Mississippi State, Arkansas. I think they're 13, 14 wins apiece over them. They've beaten Tennessee 14 or 15 times in a row. They've beaten Vanderbilt, 15 to 20 times in a row. I mean, that's not consistent, that you can go in and play with somebody. But it's night in and night out in baseball. I mean, Ole Miss can go to Mississippi State and get swept. And Mississippi State can go to Arkansas and get swept. I mean, talk about how hard it is to win. For yourself, covering the game, Mississippi State's a really good program. They won the SEC one time since 1990. And it was just a couple of years ago. And Arkansas went from a really, really good team one year to they won like 8 or 9 games the next year. And that was the year Mississippi State won the SEC. And I mean, you look at LSU, 6 national championships. They're picked to finish 4th in the SEC West behind Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and Arkansas. And 2 years ago, 3 years now, I guess, Arkansas was in the national championship game and should have won the national championship, but missed the pop fly down the line, and Oregon State ended up winning. And then Vanderbilt's the defending national champions from the 2019 season. So, Florida's won it. South Carolina's won it. Missouri way back in the day won it. Georgia was the first team in 1990 to win the national title from the SEC. So you've got all these teams that win, in the East and the West. But you can look at how the coaches have predicted Florida and Vanderbilt with 91 and 79 points, and then it drops off to 58. And how cluttered it is atop the SEC West with Ole Miss getting 7 votes and 78 points. Mississippi State 3 votes and 73 points, Arkansas 2 votes and 72 points, and LSU 2 votes and 63 points. I mean, 15 points separate the top 4 teams in that league, and it's not that way over on the East. But it's a juggernaut season for the boys that reside in the SEC West, and it's going to be a fantastic race. It's going to be very exciting, to see all these teams play and how the season plays out.
Let me give you a few things that speak to the strength of the West. Let's go from the bottom. You've got Alabama with a first-team All-American Friday night starter, picked last in the league, lots of returning experience. Auburn picked next to last. The Tigers were in the last College World Series. The left side of their infield is first-team All-SEC. Texas A&M, College World Series back in 2017. The Aggies, just a team that's in the NCAA tournament every year. In fact, I think A&M has missed it since like 06 maybe. So, just a perennially consistent program. They're picked 5th. I could go on and on. Let's look at the individuals again. Gunnar Hoagland, Ole Miss, potential first rounder, not on the first or second team All-SEC squad. I mean, I could go on and on with more examples of players and other things, but it just really speaks again to the strength of the league that we keep referencing.
I mean, it really is. I mean, we've talked a little bit about the All-SEC team. I mean, 11 of the 14 teams are represented. If Georgia, Texas A&M, and Missouri didn't have anybody on the team, but that doesn't mean that Georgia, Texas A&M, and Missouri, don't have good players. And teams that are projected in the top 25, teams that are projected to go to regionals, different things like that. I mean, Alabama, LSU, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Auburn, Arkansas, they've all got multiple players on the preseason All-SEC teams as well as preseason All-Americans. And you talk about, Tommy Mace and Kumar Rocker, being the number ones at Florida and LSU and Vanderbilt on the East. Check out these potential number 1 Friday night starters in the SEC West. With Connor Prelip at Alabama, Richard Pitts at Auburn, Doug Nikhazy at Ole Miss, Christian McLeod at Mississippi State, Jaden Hill at LSU, Bryce Miller at Texas A&M, and Caleb Bolden at Arkansas. I mean, you got Prelip and Fitz and Hill are on those preseason All-American teams. I mean, that's your Friday night starters in the SEC West. I mean, can you imagine Jaden Hill and Doug Nikhazy in Baton Rouge or Oxford and Connor Prelip and Richard Fitz April 16th on a Friday night in Tuscaloosa? I mean, I know these are going to be limited crowds, but I mean, these are dynamite arms. I mean, these are star power, unbelievably high draft pick kind of guys, and you're going to be going out there and seeing these guys pitch in your home city on a Friday night. I mean, Vanderbilt's spoiled. I mean, I don't mean that in a negative way, but they're spoiled because Tim's done such a really good job there, and they've had all these arms come through. I mean, there's a lot of teams in the country that, doesn't have one Kumar Rocker, yet alone have Kumar Rocker and Jack Leiter to lean on and run those 2 guys out there. And Vanderbilt fans probably think, well, it's so easy. Well, it's not easy. I mean, it's hard to do. And Isaiah Thomas fits in really well with them. As you mentioned earlier, he's on the preseason All-American team, but he can't even scratch the SEC preseason coaches team. I mean, there's just star power everywhere in this league through every team, from the projected national champions, Florida, Vandy, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Arkansas, LSU, to the people that they picking last is like LSU and or Alabama and Missouri, Kentucky's and people like that. I mean, they're star players everywhere. Alabama's other guy is Owen Diodati. Auburn's got Richard Fitz and Rankin Woley. Middle of the lineup guy. For them that hit really well last year. You mentioned T.J. Collette, big power hitter at Kentucky, can really swing it, and just good players up and down the lineup for every team, and good players on the mound. And Friday night in the SEC are going to be fun. I mean, they're going to be fun to watch. You're going to have all these arms running out there, and we say that in the first week. Every game will probably be 11-9, but I think you talk about Florida. They may not have that star power with the guy on the mound. Mace may not be that guy that lights it up like a rocker and a pre-lip and a Jack Leiter does. But Florida's deep. They got a lot of length in their starters. They got a lot of length in their bullpen. And he's a matchup kind of guy anyway, so he really doesn't care if a guy goes 4 innings, 5 innings, 6 innings, because I got this guy coming in to get 2 outs. This guy can come in and get 3 outs. This guy comes in with the left-handers. This guy, and that's how kind of Kevin has navigated his pitching staff over the years. And, they've got guys that can go 6, 7 innings, but that's not such a necessary thing anymore. And even Brad Bohannon the other night on his coach's radio show that he did in Tuscaloosa was talking about Pre-Lip being the number 1, and he's not opposed to having a committee pitch on Saturday and Sunday, the early part of the year. He feels like he's got Pre-Lip and then 8 or 9 other guys that can eat up innings for him to get to the back end of the bullpen with Garrett Roops and Chase Lee, who are veteran guys who've eaten up a lot of innings at the end of the games. And you even look at major league guys now who, have a guy that he's the starter, but he's only going to go an inning or 2, and then they're going to bring in a guy for a couple innings and then 3 innings, and then put the game in the closer's hand in the 8th or 9th inning. And a lot of teams are doing that. And there's teams in this league now that have the depth on the mound to do that and face these really powerful lineups and navigate through 3 games in a weekend series to try to win a series.
Barry, I'd like to ask you something. And again, this is what it is. The league is stacked. The talent is stacked in this league. And so there are tough choices, and there are always going to be good players left out once that's the case. But as you look through the All-SEC teams in the conference forecast, anything stick out that you might have a disagreement with?
I think a lot of it is probably fairly accurate, based on what you saw last year. I don't know that Florida's the runaway team in the East. I think Vanderbilt's going to have a lot to say about that. Can Tennessee and South Carolina and Georgia get to that level and compete with them? Probably regional-wise, yes, but probably not for the division title. Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Arkansas, LSU. I've kind of gone back and forth in the West with what I thought. I like Arkansas. I think they have a really good team. I think they're going to pitch. I think they're going to play defense, and I think they're going to hit and score a ton of runs. Now I think they could win the West. I think Mississippi State could win the West. Ole Miss is going to hit, and they got a couple of really good arms on the mound. So I don't know that I would. I don't know that there would be something that would just be a drastic change. With that, but I think Vanderbilt's probably closer to first than most people think with Florida. With 12 first place votes, 12 vote discrepancy, Florida to Vanderbilt. I think that's going to be a closer deal than that. And I do think the West is going to be a really difficult race, this year, and who wins. I don't know that I'd change much up from what it is, but I do like Arkansas better than third, I think, in the Western Division. I do like their team.
The ones that potentially stick out to me in the West, Alabama, I mean, my goodness, the Crimson Tide was just playing so well a year ago. Again, Connor Prelip at the top of that rotation. A lot of experienced players, maybe not game experience as much as you'd hope, but a lot of guys in their 4th and 5th years, and I think maybe that translates sometimes. I look in the East, I don't know, Georgia 5th place. I might be tempted to bump the Bulldogs up a notch, maybe, given the way that coaching staff has developed pitching. And, of course, Jonathan Cannon's still around. Offense is going to be an issue for them, maybe, but they have pitched so well recently. Kentucky, another one that Cats have really got some elite bats, and John Rhodes and T.J. Collette. They feel they've upgraded their pitching a little bit. Mason Hazelwood got a chance to be a pretty good Friday night guy. I don't know. I look at the Wildcats, and maybe this is because I don't know as much about Missouri, but Kentucky 7th, I have a feeling that the Wildcats could improve with that by a notch, maybe two. Again, not major issues that I have here, but I look at some things, and I don't know. I might have gone a little bit different. Don't have a big issue on the whole, but those are some things that I could see playing out differently by year's end.
I agree with that wholeheartedly, particularly for Alabama's case. I think a lot of theirs hinges on what they've done in the past. And we mentioned earlier they're not that far removed from a 4-win SEC season. You know, they've only won 20 SEC games in the last 3 years. And while they were 16-1 and had played really well last year with a good lineup, I mean, Diodati, Drew Williamson at first base is going to be a really good player. Peyton Wilson in the middle of the infield. Jim Jarvis in the middle of the infield. You know, both of those guys are going to be really good. You know, Prater's back and healthy. You know, Wilson's a guy, we talked about him a little bit, you and I, in prepping to do this. You know, that's Craig Biggio of this league. You know, he can catch, and he has caught in a game. He can play second base, and he has played second base in a game in this league. And he can play center field, and he has done that in a game in this league. But I think the coaches looking at Alabama, they were 16-1 last year, but it wasn't in the SEC. So what are they going to do in the SEC? And I think last year they would have surprised some people in the league. I think Missouri was in for a rude awakening the first weekend when they came here, because this team does not lack confidence. They did not lack confidence last year, and they do not lack confidence this year. Now, they're not arrogant about it, and they're not cocky about it. They just feel like that they're a really good team, and they felt like that the COVID-shortened season last year kept them from going to a regional. I really do believe that everybody on their team felt like they were a regional team last year. But can they do this in an SEC schedule? Can they do this when they open at Arkansas? Can they do this against Ole Miss and Mississippi State at home? Can they do this at LSU? You know, they go to Ole Miss, they go to Arkansas, LSU, and Texas A&M, and they host Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and Auburn at home. So that's their 6 SEC series. You know, they get the top 2 teams at home, and they get the 3rd and 4th place teams on the road, and then they go on the road to the projected 5th place team, and they host the projected 6th place team at home. So that's their schedule. They got Missouri at home, they have Tennessee at home, and then they have Vanderbilt and Kentucky on the road. That's their 10 SEC series. So how will they navigate the SEC schedule? How will they play on the road against quality elite teams? And I think he's done a good job with his schedule this year to help him. His non-conference schedule last year, people thought, okay, 16-1 against Harvard, Lipscomb, teams like that. His non-conference schedule this year is pretty good. And if you're a football fan and you look at it, you go, now those teams are not any good. But in baseball, you know, the College of Charleston is a pretty good team. Wright State is a pretty good team. Stetson is a pretty good team. All 3 of those non-conference weekends, he opens with McNeese. All 3 of those non-conference weekends, those 3 teams are probably going to be in the top 100 in the RPI. And that's going to help them. They're going to be challenged. Stetson's got arms. Stetson's going to be a good challenge for them. And they produced Corey Kluber into the major leagues. I mean, in recent history, they have arms, and they're going to be good. If they can hit, they feel like they're a regional team. They're going to be good. Wright State had some really good teams. Played in a regional in Louisville a few years ago. Greg Lovell was their coach. Now he's the head coach at UCF. former Miami catcher and national champion with the Hurricanes. They're going to compete. And the College of Charleston is very good. They're going to compete in their league, and they're going to be a tough out for people. They could be a regional team. So he feels he's made his schedule with some of these teams and feels like that they have a chance to be good in the non-conference and keep the momentum going. But I think for a lot of people looking at Alabama's, can they do this consistently week in and week out against an SEC team? And in 4 weeks, we're going to find that out.
Yeah, one more footnote on Alabama here. I didn't get to see the Crimson Tide play a lot last year. I did see some of the last games that team played in bits and pieces before the season came to an end, but I did see the Crimson Tide in Vandy in a 3-game series 2 years ago, and I was really impressed with the way Alabama was able to piece together some things on the pitching end that weekend. The dam kind of burst on Sunday as depth took a toll, but I thought the first 2 games, the Crimson Tide really did a pretty good job of matching up, and a lot of those guys that I saw that weekend are back. Before we move on from the SEC and hit some bigger picture college baseball things, Barry, any more thoughts on the league? And again, we will get into more in-depth previews next week of both the East and the West, but any more general thoughts before we change topics here a bit, Barry?
Well, I just think it's like, as we've mentioned, it's going to be an exciting year, for all the teams. I know they're all excited to be playing one as the season just abruptly ended last year on March the 12th, or actually was halted, and then later decided that they were not going to play. When they originally started, the SEC season was going to open and there would be no fans, and then it became, okay, now we're going to pause for 2 weeks, and we're going to pause for 3 more weeks, and then it eventually just ended. And a lot of these kids, didn't have a chance to finish their season. A lot of these kids didn't have a chance to go somewhere this summer and play. They had limited, access in the fall. They've been inter squatting. They didn't get the chance to play their 2 fall games that they're allowed to play, or their 2 teams, and make it 16, 18 innings. That was also taken away. So it's been almost, it has been 48 weeks since they've had a, competition. And I'm anxious to see how it's going to transpire next Friday when everybody takes the field, for the first time. There's going to be a lot of excitement. There's going to be a lot of nerves. There's going to be some people that are like, wow, we haven't done this in a while. Can I still hit? Can I still throw a strike, throw a breaking ball for a strike? And if I bury it in the dirt, can my catcher block it in a critical situation? And I think there's a lot of coaches out there who are excited yet anxious, not exactly sure what they're going to get, from their team next Friday night and when they open the season. And they'll have 4 weeks of non-league games. We even went to, hadn't been a month since the schedule was released, and we didn't know if there were going to be non-conference weekends or midweek games, or we didn't know, a month ago what we were staring in the face for this season. And there are still teams that even today are announcing their season, announcing their schedule. Like Lipscomb released their schedule today, and they open next Friday. So they got, okay, well, now we know who we're playing. And, some of the other teams in the North, I think the MAAC, the Metro Atlantic, they don't begin till, the first weekend of March. Some teams are only playing conference-only games. Some people are only playing conference games within their divisions, where there's 6 teams in their division, and, they'll play 4 games at home and 4 games on the road against them. So they've got, 8 games against 5 teams, and they're playing 40 games, and that's it. And, the SEC, we're blessed. We have really good leadership. People can say what they want to about the SEC, and people can say what they want to about, protocols and this and that. But, Greg Sankey put his league first, and he represented his league, and he stuck up for his teams, his coaches, and his players, and he fought for his teams and his coaches and his players as commissioner. And he got through all the seasons so far. He's had some pauses. Some teams have had to pause, but we had a football season, and we won a national championship football in this league. And he's got really good basketball teams, and he's going to have really good softball teams and really good baseball teams, and they're going to play a season, and they're going to play a 56-game season. They're going to play non-conference weekends, midweek games, regular 30-game SEC schedule with 10 3-game series, and that's how we remember it, and that's what we're getting this year, and I think we should all really be thankful that the game is back 1 week from tomorrow, and it's going to be a regular, normal season on the schedule, maybe even on the field, maybe not in the stands, but it's going to be a normal season, and there's going to be a winner, and a bunch of teams from the SEC are going to go to the tournament, and there'll probably be a bunch of teams in the SEC in Omaha, and an SEC team may raise the trophy in June at the end of the year, and it's an exciting season, and I think everybody involved in this league, from the conference office to the schools, should just be able to step back and take a minute and look and go, yeah, hey, we did it. And we're getting them on the field, and we're getting our kids on the field, and that's the most important thing.
Barry, it was obviously a difficult year last year with the pandemic affecting everybody. You saw some programs cut. You saw some programs almost cut. You saw some programs even that have come to Division I since we last saw baseball. Give us an update on where things stand in the big NCAA picture with comings and goings with programs.
Well, we've had some challenges off the field. 3 teams suffered loss due to the pandemic. Boise State, who had a halt on their program for over 40 years, reinstated baseball in 2020. They got to play a grand old 13 games, and then unfortunately they pulled the plug on the program. So Boise State was back for just a few weeks, and they have since dropped baseball and will no longer be in the WAC. Chicago State dropped their baseball program this summer. They will no longer be fielding a baseball team. So the WAC lost 2 teams there. And surprisingly, Furman, out of the Southern Conference, they pulled the plug on their baseball program, and they will no longer be playing baseball this year as well. Bowling Green, out of the MAC, dropped their program, and there was a massive outcry from Bowling Green alums, one being Oral Hershiser, the Bulldog from the Dodgers, and they got together, and their former players went to see the president, went to see the AD. I think they handled it correctly. They raised a bunch of money. They promised a bunch of money. And guess what? Bowling Green's back on the schedule, and they're back in the MAC, and that's good for them, and that's a good thing for their program and their kids to be able to fill the team, and they'll be excited when they open next week as well. 2 teams have opted out this year, Bethune-Cookman and Maryland Eastern Shore. They're not going to play baseball at all this year out of the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference. 4 teams have relocated. Cal State Bakersfield has moved from the WAC to the Big West. New Jersey Tech has moved from the Atlantic Sun to the America East, which I think is a really good move for them. Why in the world New Jersey Tech was playing a conference series in DeLand, Florida is beyond me, and playing a conference series in Florence, Alabama, when all those teams up in the Northeast are a van ride away or a bus ride away. So they've moved to the America East. Purdue-Fort Wayne has moved from the Summit to the Horizon, and UConn, as in all their sports, left the American Athletic Conference and have reunited with their friends and family members in the Big East Conference. So they have moved there as well. LaSalle in the Atlantic 10 will be playing its final season of baseball. They will be dropping the sport after the 2021 season. And we welcome four new teams to Division I baseball this year. Bellarmine out of Louisville will move into the Atlantic Sun Conference. They will actually play 2 games at Kentucky this year, March the 13th and April the 30th, and will open the season with Louisville in a crosstown series. I don't believe any. I think one of the games is actually going to be at Bellarmine at their campus. UC San Diego has made the transition from D2 to D1. They'll join the Big West Conference. And Tarleton State and Dixie State, who were former D2 schools, Dixie State actually won a national championship in baseball as an NAIA program. and is the home of former major leaguer Bruce Hurst, who was on the '86 Red Sox team that lost to the Mets in the World Series. Dixie State and Tarleton will join the WAC for the first time as Division I teams this year. And of course, you've seen the news with the Southland Conference and the WAC. The WAC is expanding and gobbling up some of the Southland Conference teams. That would be for next year. It's 4 Southland Conference teams are going to join the WAC, and Central Arkansas, who is in the Southland, along with Eastern Kentucky and Jacksonville State. This is in 2022. Will be leaving the OBC and going to the Atlantic Sun and playing there. So some changes in the future, but the immediate stuff. Welcome Bellarmine and Dixie State and Tarleton and UC San Diego to the Division I ranks this year, and a lot of new faces and a lot of changes in some of the conference structure. But even on the national scene, should be a really fun go this year.
Barry, anything in the way of rule changes that's caught your eye?
A lot of conferences are looking at replay. I did see the NCAA is allowing the potential for the ghost runner at second base, if you will, in extra innings. And when I say ghost runner, it's not like an imaginary guy, but the big leagues have adopted this in extra innings. The minor leagues did it to speed up the game. The person who makes the last out in the 9th inning would start the 10th inning at second base, and then you would just play the inning as normal. But then you don't play the inning as normal because your leadoff guy has a man on second, and a lot of times teams try to bunt and get him over to third. It's a scoring nightmare to have to insert him in. It's not an earned run if they score. It speeds up the game. They say friends that I know that are in the major leagues that do the games and in the minor leagues hate it. I don't like it. I don't think it's good. I hope the SEC doesn't do that. I'm not for that at all. I hope that doesn't come our way. It could, but that's one thing that I've noticed that the NCAA approved. I think it's a conference by conference thing that you can either accept it as the conference or decline it as a conference. And I even also think in your non-conference games that you can come up to the home plate meeting and as you exchange lineup cards, go, we're not going to play with a ghost runner, or we've decided we're going to use a ghost runner if we go extra innings. But that's really the one thing that I've seen that's out there that the NCAA has approved, and I don't like it. I don't think it's good. I don't think there should be. I don't have a real problem in college with 7-inning games. I mean, I don't like them in the SEC. I don't like that. I don't like run rule games in the SEC. I don't think that's good for us. Some of the leagues, I don't have a problem with that. Maybe the non-Power 5 leagues and stuff. They don't have a run rule in the NCAA tournament. So why should you have a run rule in the regular season if you don't have it in the NCAA tournament? And if you're going to have it in the regular season, then you ought to have it in the NCAA tournament, because that's when you're really thin on pitching and you're trying to navigate a game and you're down 24-4 in the 6th inning, and you go, we got to get 11 more outs. And why not just kill it and move on? But they do it in the regular season in some leagues, not done in the SEC. SEC only plays the 7-inning games if there's a doubleheader on Sunday on getaway day. They don't do it for the other games. Some leagues play 9 and 7. Some leagues play 2 7s on Saturdays and stuff. But I'm not a big 7-inning guy, and I'm certainly not a fan of the ghost runner.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that, but I will say the SEC, it appears, has made a decision that for conference-only games on getaway days where they've got that drop-dead time to deal with, the coaches have agreed to the Major League rule where you start extra innings with the runner at second base on nobody out. I don't like the rule, but under that circumstance, I guess I can support it because it beats a tie game for sure. Anyway, with that, Barry, really looking forward to having you as part of our SEC coverage here. We'll have more coming next week, and it's going to be a fun baseball season, and I'm really grateful that you are here with us at the 14.
Well, Chris, it's my pleasure. I'm really thrilled and honored to be a part of the team, and I hope we can have good podcasts and conversations during the course of the season and talk about the game that we both enjoy so much. And college baseball, and our league puts an incredible product on the field, and I'm excited to move forward as we go into the year.
We will, and Barry, we'll catch up with you next week. We'll have a podcast about the SEC East, and we'll do another one about the SEC West, and we look forward to that then.
Thanks a bunch. Looking forward to talking to you next week.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of The 14. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast at Apple Podcasts or wherever you get yours. Please leave us a rating and review if you don't mind. Tell a friend or two. Anyway, have a wonderful weekend. I'm your host, Chris Lee, here at The 14. We will be back on Monday with more coverage of the Southeastern Conference.